He was just another homeless man ignored by a city too busy to care. Until one fateful courtroom twist revealed a buried secret that left everyone speechless. This is the incredible true story of Raymond Ellis, a decorated U.S. Army staff sergeant who risked everything on the battlefield only to return home and fade into obscurity. For 15 long years, he lived on the streets unseen and forgotten, until a desperate act of survival brought him face to face with a justice system that had long overlooked his sacrifice. But what started as a petty theft case soon unraveled into something far greater, a revelation of heroism, loyalty, and the hidden scars of service. If you believe that no hero should ever be forgotten, comment respect below and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and redemption. The biting wind swept through the streets of Brooklyn, rattling the windows of old brownstones and carrying flecks of snow through the gray afternoon light. It was the kind of cold that gnawed straight to the bone, the kind that made even the toughest city dwellers quicken their pace and bury their hands deeper into their pockets. But Raymond Ellis, 67 years old and homeless for over a decade, had nowhere to hurry to and nothing warm waiting for him. Wrapped in a threadbare Army surplus jacket, his silver beard wild and unkempt, Raymond shuffled slowly along the block, each step heavy with exhaustion. His boots cracked and worn thin, crunched faintly over patches of dirty ice. Slung over one shoulder was his old military backpack, its once sturdy canvas now faded and frayed, the straps threatening to give out at any moment. It was all he had left from a life long gone. The streets were bustling in that familiar pre-dinner rush. Locals bustled in and out of corner stores and cafes, faces flushed from the cold eyes set straight ahead. No one really noticed Raymond anymore. He was part of the background, as familiar and overlooked as the graffiti-tagged lampposts and dented trash cans. He preferred it that way. Attention usually brought trouble. But today his body was screaming louder than his pride. He hadn't eaten in nearly 3 days. The dizziness had set in that morning, and by afternoon the ache in his stomach was unbearable, a deep, hollow gnawing that refused to let go. He had walked past Donovan's corner market twice already, fighting the internal war between desperation and dignity. But as the sky darkened and the temperature plummeted, survival won out. He pushed open the door of Donovan's, the familiar jingle of the bell above barely registering in his ears. The store was warm, the smell of baked goods and roasted chicken wafting from the deli counter. Raymond's eyes scanned quickly. Mr. Donovan was busy restocking shelves at the back, chatting with a customer about Thanksgiving plans. Heart pounding but face expressionless, Raymond drifted toward the bread rack, moving with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who'd perfected the art of being invisible. His fingers trembled as he slipped a day-old loaf of bread under his coat. He zipped up halfway, casting a fleeting glance toward the mirrors installed high in the corners of the store, new security additions that hadn't been there the last time he came in. He turned to leave, head down, hoping to make it out before anyone noticed. "Hey, stop right there," Mr. Donovan's voice bellowed across the aisle. "I'm calling the cops!" Raymond froze in place, shoulders slumping, as if a great weight had finally pressed him down for good. He made no attempt to run, no words of excuse. He simply stood there, eyes fixed on the floor, the outline of the bread still visible under his partially zipped jacket. The cold outside had been brutal, but in that moment it was nothing compared to the chill of humiliation creeping up his spine. Before life had worn him down, Raymond Ellis had been a man of remarkable discipline and quiet pride. Born and raised in Queens, he had enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 19, determined to build something meaningful out of his modest beginnings. Over the next 22 years, Raymond would serve with unwavering dedication, deploying twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan, earning respect not for grand speeches or bravado, but for his steadfast reliability and cool head under pressure. His most decorated moment came in 2003 near Fallujah during a convoy mission that turned deadly. Enemy fire erupted from both sides of the narrow dirt road, bullets whizzing past as explosions rocked the vehicles. One of the fuel trucks, a volatile tinderbox, was hit and quickly caught fire. Chaos followed, soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting commands and prayers alike. Raymond didn't hesitate. Ignoring shouted orders to take cover, he leapt into the driver's seat of the burning truck and gunned it forward, steering it away from the pinned-down convoy. His hands blistered against the hot metal smoke, stinging his eyes, but he kept going until he'd maneuvered the truck to an open field far enough away to prevent catastrophe. Moments after he bailed out, the truck exploded in a fireball that shook the earth. 17 soldiers owed their lives to that single act of courage, a fact Raymond never brought up himself. A photo of Raymond carrying a wounded Afghan child to a medevac chopper during a humanitarian mission later made the front page of the New York Times, briefly turning him into a symbol of American compassion. But as quickly as the headlines faded, so too did the recognition. That was fine by Raymond. He hadn't served for medals or applause. Off the battlefield, Raymond's world revolved around his wife, Margaret. They met in Germany during his first deployment and were inseparable ever since. She was his anchor, his light in dark places. They had no children, but their modest apartment in Brooklyn had been filled with laughter, shared meals, and quiet evenings listening to old jazz records. In 2008, tragedy struck. Margaret was diagnosed with cancer, but what stung the most was that the VA hospital initially misdiagnosed her symptoms, costing them precious time. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. She passed away within 6 months of her diagnosis, leaving Raymond devastated. Grief consumed him in ways he never expected. He pushed away friends, declined support from relatives, and stopped trusting the very institutions he had served for decades. He sold their apartment, donating most of the money to Margaret's favorite cancer charity, and disappeared into the shadows of the city. Sometimes he had once whispered to a volunteer at a soup kitchen, "It's easier to be nobody than somebody who failed the person they loved most." From that point on, Raymond chose invisibility. His military service became a silent memory known only to himself and the few who bothered to ask. Even when he kept his dog tags tucked beneath his shirt, they felt less like a badge of honor and more like a relic of a life that no longer seemed real. For over 15 years, Raymond drifted through Brooklyn's streets, known by a few locals as the Quiet One. Unlike other homeless individuals who begged or caused disturbances, he kept to himself, moving door to door, alley to alley, blending into the city's overlooked corners. His only constants were his old backpack, the dog tags, and a worn laminated photo of Margaret that he carried like a talisman, a piece of his heart wrapped in plastic against the elements. For Raymond Ellis, every day was a quiet battle for survival, a routine stitched together by necessity and a fierce, lingering pride that refused to let him beg. His presence had long been a fixture in the Brooklyn neighborhood, the silent man with the military backpack, gathering bottles from overflowing trash bins, his silver beard bristling against the cold wind. Residents who noticed him at all knew he never asked for money, never caused trouble. He simply existed, an invisible thread in the fabric of the city. Raymond's code of honor was simple: stay out of the way, survive without being a burden, and keep moving. He had perfected the art of making himself small, slipping into doorways at night, never settling in one place too long to avoid complaints or police harassment. He learned which alleys were safest, which storefronts left their heating vents exposed, and which restaurant workers were quietly generous with leftovers at closing time. But despite his discipline, winter always found a way to break through his defenses. The bitter cold gnawed at old injuries. The shrapnel scars in his legs ached fiercely in damp weather, and the persistent cough that had lodged in his chest for years worsened with each drop in temperature. His boots, long past their prime, offered little protection, and he often woke with his fingers stiff and numb, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. Inside that worn pack was everything that mattered: a spare shirt, a crumpled blanket, his dog tags, and a weathered plastic pouch holding Margaret's photo. That picture was his compass, his reminder of love and loss, his reason to keep pushing through even on the darkest days. He would take it out sometimes during the dead of night, holding it close, whispering, "Almost there, Maggie. Just a little longer." But survival was getting harder. The city was changing. Security cameras sprouted on every corner. Store owners grew less tolerant, and the streets seemed colder in more ways than one. Where once he might have found quiet spots to rest undisturbed, now there were metal spikes on ledges and benches designed to keep people like him away. It was as if the city itself wanted to erase his kind entirely. Still, Raymond pressed on. He collected bottles diligently, selling them for a few cents apiece, enough to buy cough syrup or a cup of hot coffee when he needed it most. He rarely entered stores unless absolutely necessary, knowing the stares he'd receive. But on that November day, with his stomach twisted painfully from hunger and his head light from dizziness, pride finally lost its hold. That was why he stepped into Donovan's corner market, desperation outweighing caution for the first time in years. And for that small act, the simple theft of a stale loaf of bread, the full weight of the system came crashing down on him, threatening to strip away what little dignity he had left. The sirens cut through the icy air just minutes after Mr. Donovan's call. Raymond Ellis didn't move. He stood still in the middle of the narrow aisle, the loaf of bread still tucked visibly inside his half-zipped coat. His shoulders sagged, eyes cast downward not out of defiance, but quiet resignation. He had known what he was doing the moment he crossed the store's threshold. He had known what would happen. Officer Cole Young, and visibly uneasy, entered the store first. His partner, more seasoned and impassive, followed closely behind. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows over the small market. Customers stood frozen, pretending to browse, but clearly watching every second. "Where is he?" Officer Cole asked, hand resting on his belt. "That's him, Mr. Donovan barked, pointing a shaking finger. "Caught him red-handed. He's done this before, and I'm not letting it slide this time." Cole approached cautiously, taking in Raymond's ragged appearance. The battered boots, the frayed backpack, the gaunt face partially hidden by an unruly beard. His eyes lingered on the thin chain around Raymond's neck, the glint of old dog tags barely visible under layers of worn fabric. Sir Cole said gently, "I need you to put your hands where I can see them." Raymond slowly complied, lifting his trembling hands, palms open. His voice, rough from disuse, came out, barely above a whisper. "Chotoy namfut, they are not me." Officer Cole hesitated, swallowing hard. Something in Raymond's tone, its mix of desperation and quiet dignity, struck a chord among. But procedure was procedure. He sighed almost apologetically and reached for his cuffs. "I'm sorry," Sir Cole said, securing the cold metal around Raymond's thin wrists. "Are you really a vet?" Raymond nodded once, eyes never meeting Cole's. "Name?" Cole pressed, eyes flicking down to the battered dog tags. "Ellis. Raymond Ellis." Mr. Donovan hovered nearby, still fuming. "Ask him how many times he's pulled this stunt. He's lucky I haven't pressed charges before." Cole didn't respond. His jaw tightened as he gently guided Raymond out of the store and toward the patrol car. The neighborhood's usual din had quieted bystanders, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the unfolding scene. At the precinct, the processing was cold and mechanical. Fingerprints, mugshot, intake forms. The same routine Walter had endured before, each time leaving a deeper dent in his pride. His court-appointed public defender showed up briefly, flipping through papers with barely concealed impatience. "Petty theft," the lawyer muttered. "Judge Brewer's courtroom, tomorrow morning." "It'll be quick." Raymond barely nodded. He had no illusions about how the system worked. He had cycled through it enough times to know his place. Another case file, another forgotten man. The following morning, Raymond was escorted into the municipal courtroom, still wearing the same wrinkled clothes from the night before. His wrists bore faint red marks from the cuffs, and his head remained bowed, as though the weight of the world pressed down harder here. The courtroom was half empty. Just a smattering of junior attorneys, reporters covering other cases, and court clerks tapping on their keyboards. No family, no friends, no one waiting to stand up and vouch for him. Case number 47, 293, State versus Raymond Ellis, the clerk intoned dully. Prosecutor adjusted his tie, stepping forward without looking at Raymond. "Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended for shoplifting from Donovan's Market. Given his prior incidents of petty theft and lack of a fixed address, the state recommends continued detention until trial." Judge Samuel Brewer, known for his no-nonsense approach and swift rulings, flipped through the case file without raising his eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment of routine justice. "Mr. Ellis," the judge finally said, eyes still on the paperwork. "How do you plead?" Raymond's voice was quiet but steady. "Guilty, Your Honor." Someone in the back row snickered. But then something unexpected happened. Judge Brewer's gaze finally lifted and locked onto Raymond. His brow furrowed, his eyes narrowing. He stared at the worn face, the silver beard, the tired eyes, and something flickered across his expression. A shadow of recognition, a memory long buried but suddenly roaring back. "Raymond Ellis," the judge repeated under his breath, fingers tightening around the file. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Brewer's demeanor shifted visibly. His hand gripped the bench until his knuckles whitened. Without warning, he stood up. The entire room froze. Judges didn't just stand up in the middle of routine hearings. Whispers rippled across the room, eyes darting in confusion. "Court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Brewer announced, his voice uncharacteristically hoarse. "The defendant will remain in the courtroom." He exited swiftly, leaving behind a room buzzing with murmurs. Raymond, however, remained motionless, eyes on the floor, unaware that his name had just opened a door to a past neither he nor the judge had expected to face again. In the hushed quiet of his chambers, Judge Samuel Brewer stood frozen, staring at the old black and white photograph he had pulled from his desk drawer. The image was grainy but unmistakable. A group of soldiers in desert fatigues posed in front of a medical tent in Iraq. Judge Brewer's eyes locked onto one man in particular, a tall figure standing in the back row, his arm resting on a battered Humvee, eyes calm and resolute, despite the dust and exhaustion. The name tag on his uniform was partially visible even after all these years, Ellis. Brewer's hands trembled as he opened his computer and accessed the military database he still had clearance for through his work with Veteran Affairs. He quickly typed in the name Raymond Ellis. Within seconds, a service record appeared, confirming what his heart already suspected. Staff Sergeant Raymond Ellis had served 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. His commendations were extensive: Bronze Star for Valor, multiple unit citations, and most notably a report dated July 2003, detailing a chaotic evacuation under enemy fire. Brewer's breath caught as he read the familiar words. It was all there: the convoy ambushed outside Fallujah, Ellis, driving a burning supply truck away from wounded soldiers, and, most gut-wrenching of all, a first-hand account of how Ellis carried a wounded medic 2 miles through hostile territory despite his own injuries. The medic's name, Private First Class Samuel Brewer. "Oh my God," the judge whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the realization. It's him. For years, Brewer had carried hazy memories of that harrowing day. The searing pain in his leg, the deafening sounds of gunfire, and the firm grip of the man who had refused to leave him behind. Back then, in the chaos, he'd only known his rescuer as Ellis, a name shouted hoarsely across the battlefield before they were separated by medics in the swirling dust of war. Brewer had searched for him on and off over the years, but like so many veterans, Ellis had disappeared into the fabric of civilian life, leaving no trace behind. Until now. With renewed urgency, Judge Brewer grabbed his phone. His first call was to the local Veterans Affairs office, demanding an immediate verification of Ellis's status. His second call was to Colonel Peter Langston, an old comrade who had served alongside both men. Langston, Brewer said, barely able to keep his voice steady, "I found him. The man who saved me. He's here. Right now, in my courtroom." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. "Then where exactly is here, Brooklyn Municipal Court? He's homeless. Caught stealing bread." Another pause. Langston's voice was low but firm. "I'll be there in 3 hours. Don't let anything happen to him until I arrive." By the time the recess ended, Brewer had composed himself as best he could, but his mind raced. He couldn't recuse himself just yet. Protocol demanded fairness, but his gut demanded justice. He would make sure Raymond Ellis's story was heard, fully, publicly, and unmistakably. Out in the courtroom, Raymond remained seated, oblivious to the whirlwind of recognition and urgency swirling just out of reach. To him, it was just another day, another cycle through the machinery of a system that had long since forgotten him. But everything was about to change. The next morning, when Raymond Ellis was escorted back into the courtroom, he immediately sensed something was different. The once half-empty gallery was now packed to capacity. Reporters filled the benches, whispering urgently to one another, their cameras flashing from just outside the courtroom doors. A row of uniformed officers stood near the back, their polished metals gleaming under the courtroom's harsh lights. Raymond blinked, confused. He clutched his old backpack tighter instinctively, bracing himself for the unknown. Gone was the disinterested public defender. In his place sat a sharply dressed, silver-haired attorney who turned to him with a firm handshake. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," he said. "I'm Marcus Bell with the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. We'll be handling your case from here." Before Raymond could even ask how or why, the bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Brewer." The room fell silent as Judge Brewer entered, but this time his demeanor was different. His usual cold detachment was replaced with something else, something that looked like deep respect and gratitude. The judge didn't sit right away. Instead, he cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the packed room. "Before we proceed with the scheduled charges against Mr. Ellis," he began, "this court will first hear testimony pertinent to the defendant's background, which may directly impact these proceedings." Whispers erupted across the gallery as Colonel Peter Langston stepped forward in full-dress uniform, his ribbons and badges a testament to decades of service. After being sworn in, he turned to face the courtroom, his gaze steady and voice unwavering. "I am Colonel Peter Langston, United States Army retired," he stated. "I served alongside Staff Sergeant Raymond Ellis in Iraq. This man before you is not just any defendant. He is a hero." Langston's voice rang through the room, clear and forceful, as he recounted the events of July 2003. The ambushed convoy, the burning supply truck, and Raymond's fearless decision to drive it away from his fellow soldiers, saving 17 lives. He then paused, his eyes locking on to Judge Brewer. And most notably, Langston continued. Staff Sergeant Ellis carried a wounded medic, Private First Class Samuel Brewer, 2 miles to safety under enemy fire, sustaining injuries himself, but refusing evacuation until the medic was stable. The courtroom fell utterly still as every eye turned to Judge Brewer, whose normally composed expression broke for the briefest moment. His hands gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles white. Brewer nodded solemnly. "I can personally attest to the truth of that statement." The young prosecutor, clearly rattled, stood up. "Your Honor, while these are commendable acts of past service, they do not negate the fact that Mr. Ellis committed theft." Colonel Langston wasn't finished. "If I may continue, Your Honor," he said, producing a thick folder. "Upon reviewing Mr. Ellis's file, we discovered a grave administrative error. In 2008, due to a system migration, Mr. Ellis's military pension and benefits were wrongly terminated when paperwork was sent to an outdated address. For 15 years, Mr. Ellis has been entitled to full benefits, approximately $1.370 per month, plus medical coverage. To date, that totals over $246,000 in unpaid compensation." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Raymond, sitting at the defense table, sat stunned, his calloused hands gripping the table edge, eyes wide with disbelief. Colonel Langston handed over notarized affidavits and letters of support from multiple officers, including a letter from a general crediting Ellis with saving his son's life during that same ambush. Judge Brewer turned his full attention to Raymond. His voice softened. "Mr. Ellis, please approach the bench." Raymond hesitated, then stood slowly as though moving through water. He stepped forward, eyes downcast, until Judge Brewer's next words made him look up. "I owe my life to you," Brewer said, his voice thick with emotion. "And this country owes you far more than it has given. I did not recognize you yesterday, but today I see you fully." He looked to the prosecutor. "Does the state wish to proceed with charges?" The prosecutor, visibly shaken, shook his head. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges with prejudice." Judge Brewer's gavel struck down with finality. "So ordered." For a moment, there was silence. Then, as Raymond stood frozen, the courtroom slowly rose to their feet one by one in a quiet, powerful salute. And for the first time in years, Raymond Ellis lifted his head high. In the days following the dramatic courtroom revelation, Raymond Ellis's story swept across news outlets and social media like wildfire. Headlines painted him as the quiet hero who had slipped through society's cracks, until justice at long last caught up to his sacrifice. The Veterans Affairs Office moved quickly, issuing a formal apology and fast-tracking Raymond's back pay along with a full medical benefits package. The figure was staggering, over $246,000 in retroactive payments plus immediate housing assistance. But for Raymond, it was never about the money. A week after the courtroom victory, Raymond moved into a modest apartment at Veterans Village, a supportive housing community for formerly homeless veterans. For the first time in 15 years, he had a door he could lock, a bed he could call his own, and a quiet space where he could place Margaret's photo beside his newly restored military decorations, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and a series of ribbons telling the story of a life once lived in honor and danger. Raymond declined most media interviews, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. But he agreed to speak at local schools, sharing honest accounts of military life and the struggles that can follow. His words were simple but profound, resonating deeply with students, many of whom had never met someone who had truly fought for something bigger than themselves. At Fort Hamilton's annual Veterans Day ceremony, Raymond stood on stage in full-dress uniform, flanked by young recruits and aging war heroes. The mayor presented him with a special commendation, and Colonel Langston, now a close friend, stood proudly by his side. When asked to give a few words, Raymond kept it brief. "I once protected this country," he said, his voice strong and clear. "And now this country has protected me in return." He paused, eyes sweeping across the sea of faces, soldiers, families, children waving small flags. "Kindness may come late," he added, "but it's never wasted." And justice, though delayed, always finds its way back. As he stepped down from the podium, the entire assembly rose to their feet in a silent salute. Raymond stood tall, returning the gesture with crisp precision, his eyes no longer clouded by years of hardship, but bright with quiet dignity. Outside the Brooklyn courthouse, a bronze plaque was later installed, a lasting tribute to Raymond Ellis and countless others like him. Beneath his name were the words, "Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten." And so Raymond's story, once buried beneath layers of silence and sorrow, became a beacon, a reminder that no sacrifice should be invisible and no hero should ever fade into the background. Raymond Ellis's story is a powerful reminder that true heroism doesn't fade with time or hardship. His journey from celebrated soldier to forgotten homeless man, and finally back to a place of dignity, shines a harsh light on the cracks too many veterans fall through. It's easy to judge what we see on the surface, but behind every face on the street, there could be a story of sacrifice, of loyalty, of battles fought both abroad and within. Raymond's case may have ended with justice, but countless others are still waiting. If his story moved you, comment, respect to honor all those who have served and sacrificed. Share this video to remind the world that no one who's given everything for their country should ever be left behind. Because true justice is not just about righting wrongs. It's about remembering the people who deserve it most.